Hey everyone, it's Flying Kraken here, and I'm bringing you today a Druid meta update. This is for all my Druid maniacs out there trying to survive in a Demon Hunter and Control Warrior infested meta where those two decks have a good couple percentage points win rate wise over any other deck in the format. So you have to make the best of what you can right now. And we're going to go over the best deck for Druid, some interesting decks coming up in the meta that people have been trying, and some very juicy, spicy deck that was shown to me on Twitter, and I'm going to give them a shout out. But first, we're going to talk with Ramp. I think this is the most obvious Druid deck on the ladder right now. It still has legs underneath it, even after Kazakusan nerf in the form of Celestial. And I think that there's also a lot of legs underneath a non-Kazakusan ramp Druid where you focus more on making big kind of giant-like things and then use Battlegrounds, Battlemaster to give things Wind Fury to kill opponents out of nowhere. We'll do a short little breakdown of these decks right quick. So Celestial Druid, this is the same Celestial Druid from the last video. We took out, I said we took out Nagas. I don't think Nagas are necessarily important to the deck anymore. They don't help out your DH matchup, and they don't really seem necessary versus the slower decks. So I don't think you need them. So what did I do? I cut those two Nagas for a DREK'THAR and a Kolak. These are two cards that kind of help in the DH matchup a little bit. If you Celestial and DH has been pounding on you, you're at 15, you can play a Wind Fury 8/8 and regain the board back a little bit. Kolak is a defensive thing that helps against multi-strike, where if they multi-strike for 8 and hit your thing, you will gain 8 armor. They will deal 8 damage to you, so you're kind of like reducing 8 damage in total. And I think that is a bit helpful. You run 2 spammies to try to help with that matchup too. But this matchup does not need Nagas to beat Control Warrior, Nagas, anything like that. Hunter, you just don't need them. Once you Celestial and you pop off and you Celestial for the second time and reduce their mana back to 1, they can't. There's not a lot of decks that can really do anything for 1 mana outside of the mirror match. So I think this is a very valuable part to keep in mind when doing the control matchups. But if you're losing the Celestial, I think this is the perfect 30 for Celestial right now. Vicious Syndicate also posted my list as the most winning list currently in the meta. They used my Naga version. I updated that Naga version, but they posted their article after or before I updated my deck. So they might change it next week, who knows. But if they agree that this is the best Celestial Druid and it's the most win rate positive Celestial Druid, I'd take my advice and play this if you want Celestial Druid. Now for non-Celestial Druid, you go back to playing like it's almost like Giant Warlock from a couple seasons ago, where you just try to get down Naga Giants, you try to get Battlemaster down, and try to get Wind Fury and kill them. This matchup I think, can handle DH a little bit better. Sometimes you have a little bit more early game with the 1-drop Naga and Druid of the Reef and stuff like that, but you suffer a little bit against Warrior. Warrior can clean your board pretty well. I think it's very, very important to win the game through Ibis. You have to beat Warrior through Ibis. You have to keep up consistent pressure with your Giants and all that kind of stuff. But then you need to like Moonlit Guidance Ibis. If you draw Ibis before you can Moonlit Guidance him, that's unfortunate. You're just going to have to make the biggest Ibis you possibly can, hopefully double it with Oracle Balloon, and try to win the game that way. That is your best way to beat Controller with this deck. You sacrifice a lot of late game inevitability with Kazakusan by having more of a straight up win condition. Now, I do think there is a Kazakusan version of Ramp that you can run that's not Celestial. I'm not really sure on an exact build, but I assume you're going to have to run 2 amalgams, maybe over the Kelp Keeper. You have to find room for Kazakusan itself, so probably take out Battleground Battlemaster at that point. But I think Ramp's in a good place right now. It's hovering around a 49-50% win rate. So try these decks out if you're really in the Ramp. And before we move on to the next deck, I'm seeing that, a lot of people are watching the videos, but not a lot of people are hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button. It really helps out the channel if you do that. So hit that like button, bonk that subscribe button, and let's move on to the next decks. Moving on to our next druid list is the Aggro Druid. Aggro Druid is not very prevalent in the format right now, but I also think that there's a lot of different builds going around that people are trying, and this is the build that I think is the best version right now. It may be odd to not try to push DREK'THAR into this deck, but I think that going for more anti-board, anti other aggro decks and having some face damage through Jungle Panther and Mr. Smite, I think is the best way to go. I think if you're playing aggro Druid, you need to have some way to be able to defend yourself also. So I think going DREK'THAR and not having the Tiger at the top end is very bad. So that, with that in mind, we are going the Asharan Gardens route, where we tried to use aquatic form and Asharan Gardens to guarantee that. We don't really have bottom feeder. You can sub in bottom feeder in this deck somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where that be, but it's something you can easily swap out one or two, one drop, two drops there, and all that kind of stuff. I think this deck needs a little bit more testing. It's not the greatest in the format. I think it's a little bit worse than Ramp Druid right now. But if you're going to do Aggro Druid, I really recommend something like this. Do something where you can push damage to Jungle Panther, where you can push damage to Mr. Smite. There might also even be a version that has Mr. Smite and also run some pirates in there. Maybe that's something we can test around, or maybe there is maybe there's a version, a DREK'THAR version with Nagas. There's a lot of trying out, but with Control Warrior super heavy in the format, it's not really worth it to play Aggro Druid unless you're seeing a ton of DH, a ton of other aggro decks, Mech Paladin, stuff like something you can get on the board, win the board. You play Okanai in the 4-drop slot also for a slot that you can use to counter a spell. So if you have a really amazing board and you think your opponent's going to brawl on turn 5, you Okanai, you play it, you choose spell, and then they can't brawl the board no more. That could win you the game. But Aggro Druid is really showing that it, without Arbor up or a super big way to buff the board, it's struggling a little bit. And hopefully moving forward, there's a build we can use. But this is what I'm doing right now. Alright, now on to our very first of the newer Druid decks that have popped up. This is a list that No Hands Gamer has played the top 10 legend. He's been really enjoying it. I've been really enjoying it. All credits due to him. This is his deck. This deck is incredibly fun, very unique. It kind of fits the boundary between a ramp deck and an aggro deck. You still have a lot of aggro things with your early game minions and stuff like that, but really the whole deck is just about flipper friends and playing and copying a bunch of free things off of Oracle Balloon, and then getting Battlegrounds Battlemaster down there and winning games out of nowhere. It's a very odd deck. It does have a hard time with Control Warrior. It can beat DH. I think that matchup is closer to 50-50, and a lot of other decks it has a chance in most matchups, just because there are turns where no matter what the deck and can't really handle a bunch of 8-8, so you have your usual ramp package like Wild Growth and Nourish and Guff and all that kind of stuff. You have an Ibis for the Guff, but you also have things like Kelp Keeper, Druid of the Reef, so it started to look like a ramp deck. But you also have things like Sea Giant and the Cat at the end, and Flipper Friends and Oracle Balloon and all that kind of stuff. So it's like a hybrid deck, really. That's basically what it is. I've been having a ton of fun with this deck. I climbed a little bit. I stayed around, top 100, 200 with this deck a good bit. But right now, as I said earlier in the video, it's really hard to keep a consistent win rate if you aren't playing DH and Warrior. And this deck is very fun. I do recommend it. As I said before, shout out to No Hands Gamer for making this very unique Druid list. Respect. But yeah, now we've saved the most spiciest deck for last. So let's go head on to that. For our last Druid deck of the day, we have a really cool deck is Reno Druid. This is a deck that Townley Hearthstone tagged me on Twitter. This is his deck list, but he gave it to me to see if I can work on it. I have not been able to get enough games in to actually change a bunch of cards or anything if it needs changing, but I have played a total of like 4 or 5 games with it, and so far I've gone 4-1, only losing to a super aggressive start from Aggro DH, but you know, what else is new? I beat all the warriors I went into, and I also beat a paladin. And this has been a really cool deck. I'm not saying this is the best druid to play out there, but this deck is incredibly cool, and it's doing a lot of things. And druid seems like one of the few classes that maybe could get off a Reno deck, mainly because the dragon package is very easy in druid. You can put just any dragon in there, and it'd be fairly decent, you know. So we have the Kazakhstan package. We also have a bunch of tech cards in the deck. We have stuff like Starfish and Doomsayer and Spammy that help with aggro or silence something we need to silence. And we just kind of have like all your basic druid cards. We also have Kazakhs in the deck. Kazakhs is really good on 4. It gives you a 5-drop if you need it. Versus Control Warrior, you can give you a 10-mana golem. 10-mana golems can be really hard to deal with at times, especially Divine Shield and Stealth. And, you know, I think one of the main reasons that Reno Druid can be possible going forward and we get more cards and more cards and more cards is we have stuff like Aquatic Form, Moonlit Guidance, and Consistent Draw. And we can play bigger cards on curve. We have enough ramp. If they keep adding ramp to the format, if they give us any kind of ramp, then you can just add it into this deck, and the deck probably becomes a little bit more consistent. But I highly recommend checking this deck out. Go check out Townley Hearthstone on Twitter. Awesome dude, good Hearthstone player, and you know, this is how the Druid meta is right now. I appreciate you sticking to the video, and this is, you know, Druid, you know, may change if we get some nerfs. I expect something to be done to DH, maybe a little bit the Warrior. I'm not really sure. I don't think the meta needs a ton of nerfs, but I do expect like slight tweaks here and there. And I hope you enjoy these deck lists. These have been really fun time, and I'll see you next video.